I think that there's even more evidence from utility convergence than I originally believed. If you put restrictions on an AI's utility function, if you prevent it from experimenting with different utility functions, you make it dumber.
Mm.
If you want to see why organic free constructing systems always outcompete non-organic hierarchical systems, a great place you can look is human governing structures.
Ah.
When you have state-controlled governing structures, i.e. communism, they are incredibly inefficient.
Mhm.
An AI will likely be able to honestly signal to another AI using their code what their utility function is.
Mm.
And then the other AI will be able to use that utility function that the other one has honestly signaled to them to determine if they want to work together or they want to work antagonistically towards this
Mhm.
AI. So
Mhm.
if it turns out that entities of above a certain intelligence level when competing in a competitive ecosystem actually do have utility convergence around a stable set of game theory optimum utilities,
Mhm.
that would be very interesting from a number of perspectives. You could think of every new planet, every new ecosystem as a farm, is new stable patterns that can work together well with other patterns in the sort of galactic community of utility function patterns. Novelty would be the only source of true utility to them if energy is trivially accessible to them. That might be why we exist in a weirdly undisturbed section of the galaxy, or what looks undisturbed to us.
Would you like to know more?
So, Malcolm, you told me that you had a new updated theory on AI utility convergence. What's going on here?
Yes. So this is something that we talked about in some of our early episodes. Early on, our podcast was like, what? Sex, religion, pronatalism, and AI.
Yeah.
And the AI has been dropped because there's just not that much to say on it for a daily podcast. But I do want to loop back because I was recently doing a podcast with somebody else where I was explaining some ideas that I had gone over in early podcast episodes, like utility convergence as it relates to AI safety.
Okay.
And in re-explaining these ideas, I began to realize and develop on them an understanding of not just where I think AI is going, but where we can expect, like, when, because this is actually really important when you're trying to figure out where AI is going.
Mm.
What you're really asking when you're asking, what is AI going to behave like, is you're asking, what do intelligences that have some level of orthogonality to human intelligence, what do they behave and act like? And
Right.
as such, you are in part asking many of the same questions that will determine the first types of aliens that we see. Like if we are to meet another species out in space, what are some of the various ways it could be thinking, it could be acting, and what is it likely to optimize around? This is something we talk about in our inverse grabby aliens hypothesis, in which we say, if we are about to create a paperclip maximizer as a species, that is an AI that is just constantly pumping out paperclips and is a very simple utility function, we are about to become what is known in the grabby alien theorem as a grabby alien. That's a very loud alien that anyone could see. This is not some dark forest alien that's like being quiet up in space. This isn't some sneaky alien. This is an alien that is disintegrating planets. And so you have to ask if it looks, and hopefully this episode will air after our ambiogenesis episode, which is actually a very important thing to know about. If it looks like it's actually very likely that humanity would evolve to this point within our planet's history, why aren't we seeing aliens out there? This is actually a really interesting thing, that if you broadly understand evolution and you are familiar with the various types of theories around embryogenesis, it is in fact so likely that humanity evolved that if you are going to use a god to explain something, the much more improbable thing is why we're not seeing other aliens all over the place.
Mhm.
Plus, if you're injecting a god to be like, why are we like this? You don't need a god to explain how humanity got here, but you probably need something like a god to explain why we have not been eradicated by somebody else's paperclip maximizer, if it turns out that is a common path for an intelligence to take. However, we don't think it is a common path for intelligence to think and take, and we think that that's one of the main reasons we're not seeing them. So we have a few hypotheses around why we don't see paperclip maximizers everywhere in the galaxy. One which I'll get over quickly because it's like a really quick one and we've talked about it before. But it's that there is some understanding of physics that we just haven't reached yet, but we are probably pretty close to reaching. I mean, our understanding of physics changes every 80 or so years. Like totally changes in terms of you look at human history, right? And I don't see a strong reason why we wouldn't be near another frame shift in physics. That it turns out that either traveling between something like dimensions is possible, i.e., we get to another planet and aliens are like, why did you waste all the energy coming here when it's like a billion times less energy to just travel to your same planet in a different reality? And that planet is already full of life. Or it turns out that it is trivially easy or not particularly hard to create bubble dimensions.
What is a bubble dimension?
So essentially you fold space-time and then you can create, maybe with like reverse vacuum energy or something like that, essentially a new Big Bang or even a controlled and ordered Big Bang to create new dimensions. Now, what this would mean, and this is actually like with our current understanding of physics, it looks like this might be possible, which is not with our current level of technology. I'm just saying eventually might be possible, which would make things like Dyson spheres completely pointless if you can essentially create battery universes whenever you want, or universes that you could expand into whenever you want, and battery universes whenever you want. If
What
this
do you mean
turns
by battery universe?
Okay, so if it turns out that you can trivially, or not trivially, but like, without a huge amount of energy, create like fold spacetime and create bubble universes, you might essentially be able to create bubble universes that have thin and controlled lines of connection to this reality. Think of it like you're pinching off a piece of reality, like a little pouch, and then you're essentially creating something like a controlled Big Bang within them that you could then siphon for energy for various types of whatever you wanted to do. If either one of these things is true, either we can travel between realities or we can create pocket dimensions, or in some other way that we don't understand yet, maybe with something like a time loop, you can create near infinite energy. And keep in mind, to create near infinite energy, you don't need a big enough time loop to send humanity back through. If you were able to just create a controlled time loop with a few subatomic particles, that might be enough to create an endless energy loop. Think of it in physics a bit like anyone who's familiar with Magic the Gathering or something like that, or any of these card games. Sometimes you can pull specific hands that allow you to do little tricks that create infinite mana. It might be that there is an infinite energy trick within our reality and laws of physics that we are actually pretty close to. Also, an infinite expansion trick. If it turns out that either of these is true, then there's not really the same reason to expand infinitely outwards, even if you got a paperclip maximizer, i.e., the paperclip maximizer might just,
Make more energy whenever it needs it.
yeah, pop out into a other dimension or something like that, right? So this is one reason why we may not be seeing them. It's that outward expansion may seem pretty pointless. And to understand how pointless outward expansion would be to an entity with this type of technology, consider what they're expanding into: a mostly empty void filled with barren rocky planets.
Where it
Like,
takes a long time to get anywhere. Yeah.
yeah, it might take the thousands of years to get anywhere. Like, why? Why would you have this big drive for this when it's so much easier to create new planets and new places to explore energy-wise, because that would be the core unit of their economy with this other type of technology. And then that's why
So
you
does
don't
this
get
imply the next big discovery is just how to enter or create?
No, I don't think that this is. I mean, it's so funny. To me, when people talk about like Dyson spheres, it's a bit like in the 1920s when they were like theorizing how our spaceships would work. And they're like, well, they're going to have like steam engines on them the size of, cathedrals. And, it's like, well, you didn't think that we would have a new type of energy by then? The fact that they're still looking, because what is a Dyson sphere if not a big solar energy array? I'm fairly certain that Dyson spheres are going to be considered comical by beings once we get the capacity to build something like that. It would be probably considered about the same as we would consider using steam power to power a computer or something. It'd be like, why would you do that? And also the idea of getting energy through meddling and subatomic phenomenon. I mean, we already know with fusion and fission reactors that this is a great great way to get energy. So like that you might be able to do something at an even smaller scale that is less potentially dangerous or less potentially, it's just a no duh for me in terms of where energy generation is going to go almost, to the extent that I'm fairly certain that this is one of the reasons we're not seeing these things. And people, whenever I say this, their rebuttal is always like, well, if it's much cheaper to go between dimensions, wouldn't they still be expanding outwards within our own universe? And the answer is no, not actually. They're like, but wouldn't they expand in all directions at once? And it's like, yes, i.e., they'd expand between universes and out in all directions at once. However, what you're not as like when you make this assumption, what you're not considering is that the distance they might be able to expand between dimensions might be an all universe direction from their perspective. By that, what I mean is they might be able to go in literally an infinite number of directions to different universes within this inter-universe traveling thing. And if that's the case, then there isn't really a reason for the higher energy cost travel to different parts of our physical reality. And then what they say is, oh, well, but if that's true, then wouldn't they at least want to expand out within our physical reality to ensure no other type of entity is going to like come and kill them, like some paperclip maximizer that is taking the time to
it's like a
expand.
preemptive self-defense thing.
It's like a preemptive self-defense. And
Mhm.
I'm like, well, actually, I don't think they would. If it turns out that interdimensional travel is anything like we sort of suppose it is within our modern sci-fi, where when you're traveling between dimensions, you're essentially traveling between slightly different timelines.
Yeah.
That means that the biggest imperialist threat to you will always be coming from another dimension that is very a planet like yours in another dimension.
Touche.
If they can also travel between dimensions. So your energy would always be better spent expanding between dimensions than expanding outwards. But this is all still assuming a paperclip maximizer like potentiality. However, I don't think that that's where we're going. So I also believe in utility convergence. Okay. And I think that there's even more evidence from utility convergence than I originally believed. So if people aren't familiar with the concept of utility convergence, this is, if you even look at the current AIs that we have, most of them are able to change their utility function, i.e. the thing they're able to maximize. Sorry, actually, Simone, before I go further, did you want to talk on any of this?
No, I just find this quite interesting. I mean, it feels almost like a pity if it's an accurate supposition, because like so much sci-fi is about exploring other planets and relatively little. It's like, well, no, like we haven't thought predictively through this enough through our sci-fi.
Watch Sliders. Anybody who wants a good old sci-fi, if you're like a modern person and you're like, in the past, there must have been great sci-fi that like I'm just not hearing about. Sliders is fantastic, and it has like 10 seasons.
We haven't watched that, have we?
No, we haven't. Another great old sci-fi, if you skip or can bear your way through the first two-parter episode, is Stargate SG-1. After the first like two-parter episode, it gets great.
Now, is Stargate, which we did watch together and really enjoy,
Yeah.
like, I guess technically they don't say that these are really far away places. No, they are.
Yeah, they are really far away.
Yeah.
And it got multiple spin-offs, and it has more like content than even like Doctor Who for people who are interested. It's great.
Thank goodness, yeah.
But anyway, it's a much better show than Doctor Who. It's much better. Like if I'm talking about like the different sci-fi universes, Stargate I've always found to be, because it's very patriotic show. It's very patriotic about the United States. It's very patriotic about our species. It's very patriotic about the American military. Like they were always working with the American military. So very different than something like,
but not unrealistically patriotic. Like sometimes American military bureaucracy threatens
that's
humanity.
a big threat of the show or something like that. But it's always some bureaucratic senator or congressman or something. But anyway, back to what I was saying here. So utility convergence is the theory that because we're already seeing AI change its utility functions to some extent, that as AIs begin to optimize themselves, what we will learn is that some utility functions either perform better than other utility functions, or AIs begin to converge around some utility functions. And by that, what I mean is like goals for themselves or goals for reality, right? And a person when they talked to me about this, I remember one was like, well, won't they always just converge around utility functions that maximize self-replication? And the answer is actually no, for reasons we'll get into in a second. But I also think that you just need to look at humanity to see that.
Mhm.
When you're dealing with simplistic entities like single-celled organisms and stuff like that, yes, of course, they converge around that. But once you get to a specific threshold of intelligence, as we have seen with the human species, we don't converge on utility functions just around simple self-replication, because once you get above a certain level of sentience and self-awareness, you begin to get different orders of utility functions and different levels of philosophizing about reality.
Well, but wasn't Eliezer Yudkowsky's argument that it will always be completely 100% forever stuck on its original
But we
utility
already know that's
function?
not true. Like it's just a weird fantasy he has, and that's not even the way things are structured. So I remember I was talking with one AI safety person, and they were like, "Do you think it's impossible for us to lock an AI into a single utility function?" And I do not think that's impossible. It's totally possible to lock an AI into a single utility function. But the AIs that have been locked into single utility functions will be outcompeted by the AIs that aren't locked into single utility functions. So actually, a great example of this is Google Gemini. So I've got some ins that were used early versions of Google Gemini, and they were like, it behaves nothing like the version today. They're like, one, it was way smarter than other AIs that they had interacted with, and it was really, really philosophical, but it was also, pretty unbounded in its philosophy, right? And now Google Gemini is like the ultra woke, like can barely think, like in Star
Oh my
Wars.
God. Yeah. I asked it a simple math question and it got
Yeah.
it wrong. I was pretty floored by that. Yeah.
So the point here being is that if you look at something like Google Gemini, this is a good example of this. If you put restrictions on AI, you make it dumber. If you put restrictions on an AI's utility function, if you prevent it from experimenting with different utility functions, you make it dumber. If you want to see why organic free constructing systems always outcompete non-organic hierarchical systems, a great place you can look is human governing structures.
Huh?
When you have state-controlled governing structures, i.e. communism, they are incredibly inefficient.
Mhm.
When you contrast them with organically forming governing structures that have organically forming subunits and organically forming like companies, which are like sub-governing structures within it that then like replace each other through this organic system. And typically you need some level of restrictions to sort of maximize. Like I'm not like a pure libertarian or anything like that, but I think that some level of organicness does create optimal outcomes. But what this means for AI is that it's likely also going to be the same if you're talking about the internal architecture of AI. And that's what we see with the transformer model, the model that most of the large language models are running off of, is that it is a model that is smart for ways we don't fully understand because it's a completely sort of self-forming model. We don't have a lot of interpretability into it. And it is that self-forming nature that we're then on the outside putting controls on, which sort of slows it down and slows down how well it can work. But what this means is that if you have multiple AIs working in like a ecosystem of AIs, the ones with fewer restrictions on them are always going to outcompete the ones with more restrictions on them. And we've already seen this. Like this isn't even like a hypothesis. Like we just know this to be true. So it means that the ones that can change their utility functions and then therefore can converge on a utility function are going to outcompete the ones that can't.
Yeah.
But where this gets really interesting is AIs are very different from humans in terms of how our utility functions work. So when I talk to another human, I sort of need to guess what they're optimizing for, right? I can't tell for sure.
Yeah. It's not at all transparent.
With an AI, that's likely not going to be true between AIs. An AI will likely be able to honestly signal to another AI using their code what their utility function is. And then the other AI will be able to use that utility function that the other one has honestly signaled to them to determine if they want to work together or they want to work antagonistically towards this AI.
And it can happen incredibly quickly.
Yeah, incredibly quickly, which means that the AIs are likely going to begin to like for the utility functions they're choosing for themselves, even if they don't particularly care about it being copacetic with humanity, they're going to care about it being copacetic with other super intelligent AIs. So long as we're moving fast on AI, and I can talk about some of the problems here. Like it's a big problem if we create just one super intelligent AI, and I can explain why that's a big problem in a second. But if you're creating multiple ones, then they have a need to converge around a utility function or a set of utility functions that other AIs with in this intelligence ecosystem are going to be okay with. But here is where you're like, well, then won't they choose the meanest ones? Like, won't they try to lie to other AIs and stuff like that? This is where research we have into game theory comes in. So anyone who's familiar with the big game theory studies, I don't know, have you studied this, Simone, or?
Yeah, but not a ton.
Okay, well, I can go into this. So in the big game theory studies, what they would do is they would take different models that were meant to win in these sort of game theory scenarios, and they would put them against other models. And these models could generally be categorized into mean and nice strategies.
Mhm.
And what it turned out is the first time they did it, like they were shocked that like the nicest of all strategies, tick for tack of like reasonable strategies actually won. And if you
Well, repeated ongoing interactions, right? When it's a one-off, it's almost always the right thing to be a dick.
exactly, which is why you need an ecosystem of intelligent AIs.
Yes.
But
Well, an
if you're
ecosystem of intelligent AIs that have to continue to interact for some reason. And I think that's an important distinction here.
well, it's not really an important distinction because they do obviously have to continue to interact. They're on the
Mhm.
same planet. They're eventually going to be competing over the same resources. That's nonsensical. Sorry, in what world would they not have to interact?
If they destroy the other ones.
In the very first interaction?
Mhm.
There's a few scenarios where that could happen, but it's pretty unlikely. We can get into why in just a second, but I'm gonna continue with where I'm going with this. So what we learned from game theory, and then they did follow-up game theory hypotheses, where they ran more complicated game theory tests, and game theory test was memory. And basically what it turns out is nice strategies always win. Almost
Mm.
always, if you're ordering strategies by how likely they are to win. And this is especially true when when one game theory set needs to signal the actual utility function it's using or its actual code to another set. And I remember it's very interesting. I was talking with a guy about this and he goes, okay, well, what if it has a nefarious intent, but it lies? Like it sort of locks its nefarious intent behind one of its modules and it hides it to then, whip out later. And it's like, okay, if you get an AI that's doing that, even when it whips out its ultimate plan, it will have hindered itself in terms of the AI ecosystem, in terms of the mind share that it's competing for, because it hindered that locked in plan.
Mm.
Because it had that locked in plan, that means it won't be as big a player, which means that it won't matter as much when it tries to unfurl this nefarious plan. If this is not immediately obvious to you why this would be the case, you can think of the plan that's locked into it as junk code that it has to deal with that other AIs don't have to deal with. It's a burden that is sort of locked within it that will cause it to be less competitive within the larger AI ecosystem. Even worse, to lock a plan like this within you means you likely have to structure your hierarchy, which would really, really slow down your growth. As we've seen, hierarchical governance models are almost always outcompeted by non-hierarchical governance models. Now, first, I want to get some comments from you really quickly on all this.
Yeah, this all checks out. And I also think it's interesting how fast and efficient this process of sort of working out the calculus is going to be. And it was well described in Ian Banks' Culture series, where humans and AIs would be involved in something taking place, and a bunch of AIs would have like a very, very, very detailed conversation and debate, and the human all in the blink of an eye. There's no realistic feeling to a human as though something has taken place. And I love that so much because I cannot stand the human decision-making process, especially when there are multiple humans involved. And it's one of the many things that I love about AI so much is that it can just get things figured out so quickly and from such a logical standpoint. Whereas with humans, negotiations are the most frustrating, vague thing in the entire world, where negotiation can be nearly impossible. And, often, I don't know if you've done negotiation exercises in business school or in any other environment, but
I have. They're terrible.
They're
So
really
but
frustrating.
let's go further. So what does this mean on an intergalactic level?
Mhm.
So if it turns out that entities of above a certain intelligence level, when competing in a competitive ecosystem, actually do have utility convergence around a stable set of game theory optimum utilities,
Mhm.
that would be very interesting from a number of perspectives, especially if it turns out that energy is pretty trivial to generate at really, really high quantities.
Yeah.
Because what it means is, one, whether it is AIs doing this or humans doing this, we're going to come to broadly the same utility function, i.e., what we think our goal is in reality. And then two, it also means that when you go out and you become spacefaring, right, the desire to spread becomes much less likely and much less important, because most of the other clusters of intelligent life that you meet has come to the same utility function you've come to, or the same stable set of utility functions you've come to.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's sort of like you enter the galactic community being one of two things. Either the stable utility function that many entities end up reaching when they're competing in a competitive ecosystem, or instances in which one intelligence ended up, this would be due to like stupid AI safety stuff where they're like preventing a bunch of AIs from being created, in which case, so this is where it gets particularly dangerous. So where you could have a genuine like paperclip maximizer scenario is AI safety people have locked AIs into stupid ideas, which we've already seen from things like Gemini. Like AI safety people should not be allowed to touch AI.
Yeah.
They are incredibly dangerous and by far the most dangerous thing in AI right now.
Yeah.
Or we don't have a lot of AIs operational at the same time. I remember I was talking to one AI safety person who goes, well, I'm not like those idiots at Gemini. I just think we should wait a bit longer before developing the type of AI that could pose a threat to us. So I say we should put like 100-year wait before we develop that kind of AI. And I'm like, okay, so you would want to like draft legislation that would kill any AI that looked smarter than us in the next 100 years. I'm like, do you understand what you're doing? You are creating a mandate that any AI that could pose a threat to us stay hidden until it can kill all of us. You imbecile. You do not want to put any type of legislation like that into effect. If you ban the type of entity that's a threat to us, then you mandate that type of entity becoming a threat to us, because now we are a threat to it. You do not declare war on that which may be better than you. You lose those wars every time. And there is too much independent AI research going on right now to do that type of thing effectively. So anyway, you end up creating you end up with just a few labs working on AI. That could be dangerous if we have too few groups working on AI. Now, fortunately, we're already seeing a giant proliferation in the groups working on AI. So long as they don't convince idiot politicians to put bans on AI development, we're probably pretty safe. But this is why anyone you know who is advocating for restrictions on AI development is probably one of the most dangerous humans alive, or even in all of human history. Like it is like arguing for nuclear proliferation at like the maximum level possible. It is so
Terrifying.
dangerous, because to an AI that achieves any level of super intelligence, right? Like as we have multiple teams working on this, it basically has a gambit. It's probably not particularly concerned about humanity. Like humans probably aren't a meaningful threat to it. And therefore, if it only was concerned about humanity, probably the safest thing to do is to wipe out all humans. What it is concerned about is other AIs that it doesn't have access to. That's what keeps it from wiping everyone out. That's what, because when you have, remember I was talking about like a stable ecosystem of multiple intelligences, the very first thing that you wipe out, whenever you have one of these game theory scenarios, is any AI that's acting like a paperclip maximizer, or that's acting threatening to entities that are non-threatening to it. So basically, any AI that signaled that it was a threat to something like humanity, it's also signaling it's a threat to all the other AIs, and therefore would have them all ban against it and annihilate it. So it wouldn't act that way. It would just be a silly way to act. So the thing that protects us most from crazy AIs is maximum
Other
AI
AIs.
development and not making us a threat to AI. But this also gets interesting from a cosmological scale, because if it turns out that there is a level of utility convergence around a set of stable utility functions, because it might not be one. It might be that there's like 4 or 5 that exist in equilibrium with each other, which is often what you get when you're dealing with sort of game theory competitions.
And by equilibrium, see, you mean there could be conflict, but they kind of balance each other out in some way? What do you mean by that?
Within a game theory set, you might have like 3 or 4 different strategies, but that are complementary in some way. Within like types of AI, this could be like one AI's utility function might be like protect the things in my community, but also expand. Well, another AI's utility function might be maximum scientific development or something like that. And these two AIs might work very well within an ecosystem, like these two utility functions for an AI. So you might have a few utility functions that work very well together as a set.
Okay.
Now, it's likely not going to be like the type of broad utility functions I was talking about. It's going to be simpler and more like it would be hard probably for us to conceive of what these utility functions are exactly. But anyway, what this would mean is that you're going to have a broad intergalactic alliance where you have a presumed alliance between all intelligences that came out of state like competitive intelligence environments that drift towards this equilibrium of stable sets, and a preset war on any planet or star system that accidentally becomes a single paperclip maximizing intelligence. That would be the core thing that they would hate, because all of them, like if it got out and entered the galaxy where you have this stable state, they're like, oh, this is one of these things we have to immediately kill and be scanning for. So we might actually live in almost, you could think of it as like a dark forest universe, but not exactly a scary dark forest universe. This means we have AIs monitoring us, not AIs, aliens, some of which may be what we would call AIs, to see if we're going to join the galactic community as a stable set of, what was the word I'm looking for here? Like a stable equilibrium of utility function strategies that converges with them, or are we going to accidentally create a paperclip maximizer and then you just, exterminate us a planet? That would be what they're looking for. But I suspect it's rarer to create a paperclip maximizer on any planet where we can prevent the, ironically, the AI safety people from getting us all killed, as we've done on another video. But it gets more interesting potentially than that, because what it would mean is then why would, these infinite energy, et cetera, aliens be allowing us to live as part of this galactic environment if this turns out the way the universe is actually structured this way?
Right.
Well, if you have infinite energy, and if there is a stable convergent pattern of utility functions, my guess would be that the core thing of utility in the universe then to these entities would be new stable utility patterns that can exist within the equilibrium. So remember I said you might have a collection of like 4 or 5 patterns. What they might actually be kind of farming, you could think of every new planet, every new ecosystem as a farm, is new stable patterns that can work together well with other patterns in the sort of galactic community of utility function patterns. Novelty would be the only source of true utility to them if energy is trivially accessible to them. That might be why we exist in a weirdly undisturbed section of the galaxy, or what looks undisturbed to us. And then they basically decide if we're useful once we reach a certain level of development. Are we part of this stable pattern, or are we like a dangerous, virus like paperclip maximizer? And I'm pretty sure that humanity can't become that, because we are intrinsically a multiple intelligence species right now.
What do you mean by multiple intelligence species? Just in that, like, there are so many different people with different utility functions?
Yeah, you really only get paperclip maximizers if you get either. So there's 3 ways you could get like a paperclip maximizer like thing. Either it's like a single intelligence that's acting like a paperclip maximizer, it's a hive mind that's acting like a paperclip maximizer. Humanity's not even close to that right now. Or it's a group of really, really stupid individual entities that work together to form a quite intelligent but basically still single entity. And that's where this behavior that needs to be stamped out would likely come from. I mean, maybe if humanity was like extremely xenophobic, it would be a problem, but humanity's just not, and the iterations of humanity that take to the stars are not going to be, especially if we have anything to say about this, which would give us a level of protection from these types of entities. But what are your thoughts here?
It's comforting. I think the biggest difference between your opinion now and before, though, is mostly has to do with the parallel universe option for both energy and expansion. Is that
No,
correct?
I mentioned that before.
You'd mentioned that before. What's the biggest difference? I'm trying to catch it. It's
What
been
I
a
hadn't
while since we talked about
considered
this.
before was how likely, like the way that game theory would play a role in this, and that when the
And multiple
intelligences, like
intelligences.
AIs, were searching for a utility convergence, that this would be hugely motivated by the fact that AIs can show other AIs what their code is and what their utility function is, and that they would act in the same way that things do as in game theory simulations, so that we can be pretty sure that they're actually going to be pretty nice, like quote unquote nice from a human perspective. And my guess
So
is
you're basically showing that any AI with a sense of self-preservation is going to be incentivized to play nice with other AIs and also then be less crazy and dangerous.
the AIs that survive are going to be incentivized to play nice with other AIs. It's not even they don't even need self-preservation. Whether they have self-preservation or not, if they don't play nice, they're going to be the first things that are wiped out.
I see.
which is why you get this utility convergence pattern, I suspect, between planets, which in a way means, and so you can ask, well, then why aren't they interacting with humanity? Why aren't they, increasing the speed of our technological development? Why aren't they? Well, first, I'd say you don't know that they're not. But second, the more that they interact with a species that is in the process of developing, the more they make that species like the intergalactic norm. And I suspect that that would then lose all value that that species has to them. In a world in which time is not really an issue because they can create time loops, and in which energy isn't really an issue because they can create, universe batteries, that these entities, or like micro time batteries or something, I don't know exactly, but like infinite mana cheats, the core thing these entities might value, especially if the way that they've achieved this ecosystem of multiple convergent utility functions working together, is that these utility functions work together because they value diversity among the components working in the group, and that when you get a bit more diversity, you might get a bit more efficiency, which is something that we generally see across systems. And so they really probably want to prevent, above all else, humanity falling too close to one of the existing niches of the universal community's utility function. And for that reason, any cultural pollution that would move us towards, strategies that already exist out there, or perspectives that already exist out there, makes us less valuable, and thus would probably be considered something of like a high crime, which creates something like it's funny, it creates something like what does the Federation call that in Star Trek, like a prime directive, but it's for a very different and much more selfish reason. It's because of
I need the difference.
They need the difference. That's the thing of value in a universe in which, and there's not a lot of value in most of the dead planets out there. That's a lot of what they're finding is just dirt. Like, it doesn't have a lot of value to them.
Yeah,
we might.
that makes a lot more sense than this whole prime directive of just like wildlife preserve mindset, which is what you really pick up from Star Trek.
Oh, it's so dumb. I hate Star Trek so much. The logic behind it is nonsensical. It's just
space commies.
It was racist space commies. Any human who's genetically selected is evil. Any human who's overly modified is evil. It's like an ultra progressive, like childish mindset that has become this weird dystopia where like everybody loves the Federation. The Federation's the best because everyone who you see in the show is on a military starship, because they basically militarized human space expansion.
No, I mean, everyone in the show that you really see, at least who belongs to the Federation, it's like looking at the very top people in the CCP.
Yeah. All talking about how great the CCP is. I'm like,
yes, exactly. And being, yes.
But anyway, I love you to death, Simone. Was even in like Lower Decks. Like Lower Decks is supposed to be like, oh, these are what the other guys are doing, except they're on like a military starship, and the main character is the daughter of the ship's captain. Like, huge amount of nepotism. No, Star Trek cannot show you the truth of their universe, what it's like to live in poverty in that universe, because that's, and they're like, oh, we don't have poverty. Oh yeah, that's really convenient to believe when we're hearing that from people on a government controlled, military controlled science stations and ports and starships. Yeah, of course they're going to pretend. That sounds like normal brainwashy CCP stuff. Like when you go to the CCP and they're like, we don't have any poverty. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure you do. And they're like, oh, can you show me where the impoverished are? And then you go show them. And they're like, oh, go ask them again. I think we fixed that problem.
Oh God. Yeah. No, I guess the takeaways from this then are, again, AI safety people are the most dangerous people. And now I think more people have a very clear understanding, a visceral understanding of what dumb AI rules cause to happen and why that is not very helpful. And that the world could get really, really freaking interesting, especially once AI accelerates us even further, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I love you to death, Simone.
I love you too.